Welcome to Still Science Lab. Tonight, we are going to explore a concept so deeply unsettling that it threatens to violently unravel your entire perception of reality, your fundamental understanding of memory, and the very nature of your own existence. We are going to dive into the claustrophobic, psychological nightmare of quantum immortality and ask the chilling, inescapable question: does your mind jump between dead timelines? For our entire recorded history, humanity has viewed death as an absolute endpoint, a dark, silent curtain falling at the end of a grand biological play. But tonight, we are going to tear down that comforting curtain and force you to look at the horrifying machinery operating backstage. We are going to examine the terrifying probability that death is not a peaceful slumber, but an illusion generated by your own mind. We will explore the mathematical certainty that you are permanently trapped in a never-ending loop of subjective survival, entirely incapable of dying, even when the laws of physics demand that you must. To truly internalize the sheer, paralyzing horror of this theory, I need you to search through the archives of your own life. I want you to recall a specific, terrifying moment when the fragile thread of your biological existence was almost permanently severed. We all have one. Think back to that instance where you narrowly, inexplicably escaped total destruction. Perhaps you were driving on a rain-slicked highway late at night, the radio humming softly, your mind wandering, when a massive, heavy truck suddenly swerved into your lane. You can probably still remember the visceral, suffocating panic. The blinding, sudden glare of the headlights, the deafening screech of locked tires sliding across wet asphalt, the agonizingly slow, terrifying dilation of time as your brain desperately braced for a kinetic impact that was mathematically inevitable. And then, impossibly, by a fraction of an inch, the crushing metal missed you. Or perhaps your encounter was not a violent accident. Maybe it was a severe illness you contracted as a child, a fever that spiked so dangerously high that the doctors whispered to your parents in the hospital hallway with grim, defeated expressions, preparing them for the worst, only for your temperature to inexplicably, miraculously break the following morning. Maybe you simply lost your footing on the edge of a steep cliff or a high stairwell, your arms violently windmilling in the empty air, your center of gravity completely gone, and yet, somehow, your hand found a desperate, blind grip on a railing or a jagged root just a microsecond before you fell into the abyss. When we survive these terrifying, heart-stopping encounters with the absolute edge of the void, our biological brains immediately and aggressively deploy a powerful psychological defense mechanism. We desperately try to rationalize the impossible in order to protect our fragile sanity. We look at the twisted metal or the staggering drop, and we tell ourselves that we were just incredibly lucky. We frame the event as a statistical anomaly, a 1 in a million roll of the cosmic dice that just happened to land in our favor. We sit in the dark, our hands trembling with residual adrenaline, and we whisper quiet words of profound gratitude to a guardian angel, to fate, to destiny, or to whatever benevolent universal force we believe is secretly watching over us. We call these moments miracles. We take immense, profound comfort in the narrative that we successfully dodged a bullet, that the Grim Reaper simply missed his swing, and that we are meant to continue walking down our single, unbroken, and highly protected timeline. This deeply ingrained, comforting biological delusion is absolutely necessary. It allows us to get out of bed the next morning, get back into our fragile cars, and continue our daily lives without being completely paralyzed by the absolute, crushing fragility of our own mortality. We convince ourselves that we beat the odds, but the cold, unforgiving mathematics of advanced theoretical physics do not believe in luck. They do not recognize the concept of miracles, and they absolutely do not care about your comforting, localized, biological delusions. The universe is a rigid, chaotic engine driven by quantum probability, and tonight we must strip away your psychological armor and look directly at the brutal mechanics of reality. Physics suggests a much darker, far more terrifying explanation for your miraculous survival. The horrifying truth that you must now confront, the reality that violently rewrites your entire past, is this: you did not survive. You did not dodge the bullet. The truck did not miss. The fever did not break, and your hand did not find the railing. In the grand, sprawling, objective architecture of the cosmos, the event that you remember as a terrifying near miss was actually a direct, catastrophic hit. You died. The heavy metal violently crushed your fragile biological frame. The illness quietly and permanently shut down your internal organs, and you fell silently into the dark. In that specific timeline, your life ended abruptly, violently, and permanently. So why are you currently sitting here, breathing, watching a screen, and possessing the distinct, continuous, unbroken memory of surviving the impossible? To answer this paralyzing paradox, we must look at the terrifying, anomalous nature of the observer in quantum mechanics. Human consciousness is the ultimate, unsolved mystery of the cosmos. It is the active, subjective lens through which the universe experiences itself, but there is a fundamental, deeply disturbing logical paradox built directly into the very foundation of existence. Your consciousness cannot mathematically, physically, or subjectively experience its own non-existence. Think about it. You cannot observe yourself not being there. You cannot experience nothingness. It is a biological and quantum impossibility, much like trying to see out of your elbow. Because your subjective awareness is the only tool you have to measure reality, reality can only exist for you if you are actively there to measure it. Therefore, when the fatal event occurred and your biological hardware was violently, irrevocably destroyed in that specific timeline, your subjective awareness did not simply fade to black. The universe absolutely does not allow the observer to switch off from their own localized perspective. Instead of experiencing the dark, peaceful, and final sleep of death, your consciousness executed a terrifying survival protocol. It instantly, flawlessly, and seamlessly transferred, at the exact, precise microsecond of your localized destruction, your mind aggressively snapped into the nearest adjacent parallel universe. It jumped the tracks of reality. It violently shifted into a timeline that was fundamentally, structurally identical to the one you just perished in, with only one infinitesimally small, microscopic quantum difference. In this new reality, the truck swerved 1 inch further to the left. The doctor administered a slightly different, more effective dose of medication. Your hand happened to find the root. Your consciousness, refusing to be extinguished, essentially hijacked the biological vessel of a parallel version of yourself that managed to survive the encounter. This transition is so incredibly smooth, so perfectly instantaneous, that your biological brain cannot even register the shift. There is no flashing light, no dizzying sensation of traveling through a wormhole. You simply wake up in a cold sweat, your heart violently hammering against your ribs, entirely convinced that you just experienced a terrifying close call. You take a deep breath, completely unaware that the air you are breathing belongs to a different universe. The chilling, undeniable reality is that you are a quantum refugee. You are an interdimensional ghost, permanently inhabiting a reality that was not originally your own. The universe is entirely saturated with dead versions of you. Every single time you have ever faced a potentially lethal scenario, every single time you walked away from a situation where the mathematical odds of survival were statistically zero, you were not experiencing good fortune. You were experiencing the violent, invisible fracture of reality itself. You look back at the grand narrative of your life, and you see a single, continuous, unbroken thread of survival. You see a story of a resilient biological organism overcoming the odds. But the terrifying, inescapable truth of quantum immortality is that you have already died 1,000 times. You have left behind a massive, invisible, and sprawling graveyard of dead timelines, entirely oblivious to the apocalyptic grief you left in your wake in every universe where your luck ran out. You are blindly walking through a reality built entirely on the bones of your own parallel corpses, permanently trapped in a never-ending loop of subjective survival, hopelessly bound to a consciousness that the universe simply, mathematically, refuses to let die. We navigate our lives completely anchored to a singular, deeply comforting hallucination, the concept of a linear timeline. We desperately believe that time is a straight, unbreakable rail, a solitary path stretching from the foggy oblivion of our birth toward the absolute certainty of our eventual death. When you stand at a crossroads in your life, whether it is a monumental, life-altering choice like marrying a specific person, or a trivial, mundane decision like choosing to turn left instead of right on your morning commute, your biological brain convinces you that your final choice collapses all other possibilities into permanent non-existence. You believe that the path you did not take simply vanishes, dissolving harmlessly into the abstract realm of imagination. You take immense psychological comfort in the idea of a singular, solid reality because it makes you feel like the sovereign author of your own story, walking down the one true, definitive version of the universe. But this deeply ingrained perception of a single, coherent timeline is a spectacular biological lie. It is a necessary neurological filter meticulously designed by evolution to keep human beings from completely losing their minds when confronted with the actual, terrifying architecture of the cosmos. To understand the horrifying mechanism that allows your consciousness to seamlessly jump away from your own death, we must violently shatter this linear hallucination. We must look at the underlying, microscopic bedrock of reality through the lens of a theory so profoundly disturbing that it was initially mocked, actively suppressed, and effectively destroyed the academic career of the physicist who dared to propose it. In the mid-1950s, a brilliant, isolated physicist named Hugh Everett III was staring into the bizarre, contradictory mathematics of quantum mechanics. At the time, the scientific establishment was fiercely committed to a concept known as the Copenhagen interpretation. This standard theory suggested that subatomic particles exist in a hazy, undetermined state of multiple, overlapping possibilities, a superposition until a conscious observer actively measures them. The exact moment they are observed, all the competing possibilities magically, inexplicably collapse into a single, definitive, and solid reality. It was a neat, comforting mathematical trick designed to keep the universe singular, predictable, and safe. But Everett saw this as a desperate, artificial compromise. He looked at the brutal, unyielding quantum equations and realized that the mathematics did not actually contain any mechanism for this supposed physical collapse. The equations did not state that the other possibilities simply vanish into the ether. So, Everett proposed a solution of pure, terrifying mathematical logic. He stated that the wave function never collapses. The other possibilities do not disappear. Instead, every single time a quantum system is forced into a state of decision, every single time an event could unfold in more than one way, reality itself violently fractures. The universe literally splits apart, instantly generating a fully realized physical copy of the entire cosmos to accommodate every single possible outcome. This is the many worlds interpretation. It is not a metaphor, it is not a theoretical abstraction or a philosophical thought experiment. It mathematically dictates that parallel universes are exactly as real, as tangible, and as fiercely physical as the chair you are sitting in right now. To truly grasp the sheer apocalyptic scale of this concept, you must completely abandon the arrogant idea that these cosmic splits only occur during major human decisions. The universe does not care about your career choices, your moral dilemmas, or your romantic regrets. The fracturing of reality is driven by the blind, chaotic, and continuous interactions of the subatomic realm. Every single time an electron in your body randomly shifts its orbit, every single time a photon of light strikes the retina of your eye, and every single time a radioactive isotope deep within the Earth's crust decays, a quantum event has occurred. And for every single one of those microscopic, invisible events, the entire universe violently tears itself in half to actualize every possible physical trajectory. Right now, as you sit breathing in the quiet of your room, you are not inhabiting a static, stable environment. You are sitting at the exact epicenter of an infinite, hyperactive, reality-generating machine. Millions of times, every single second, your physical body, the room around you, the earth beneath your feet, and the sprawling billions of light years of the observable cosmos are aggressively and flawlessly duplicated. The reality you are currently experiencing is just one incredibly thin, microscopic slice of a sprawling, infinitely thick deck of cosmic cards. You are constantly, relentlessly being cloned along with the entirety of the universe, splintering off into billions of slightly different trajectories every single time your heart beats. When you zoom out and look at the grand architecture of existence through the lens of the many worlds interpretation, the universe completely ceases to be a single, majestic, and open timeline. It instantly becomes an infinitely branching, profoundly claustrophobic maze of parallel realities. It is a massive, incredibly dense, and rapidly expanding web of existence where the comforting concept of unfulfilled potential is mathematically eradicated. Everything that can happen must happen. Everything that is physically possible under the unyielding laws of quantum mechanics is not just a theoretical probability, it is an absolute, unavoidable physical certainty actively playing out in an adjacent branch of reality. This is where the profound, suffocating dread of the quantum multiverse truly takes hold. We like to entertain the idea of parallel universes as a fun, science fiction escape, a place where we might have made a better financial investment, married our high school sweetheart, or become incredibly wealthy and successful. But the mathematics of infinite branching do not care about your happiness or your success. The many worlds interpretation is a completely blind, apathetic engine of creation, and it mathematically demands the actualization of every single probability, no matter how profoundly dark, tragic, or horrifying it might be. If every possible outcome physically exists, then the comforting psychological buffer of what if is brutally and violently ripped away. Every single terrifying intrusive thought you have ever had, every horrific worst-case scenario your anxious mind has ever desperately imagined in the dead of night is not a fiction. It is a live documentary of an adjacent timeline. There is a fully realized physical universe existing right next to this one, where you made the absolute worst possible decision at every single crossroads of your life. There is a reality where you are currently experiencing unimaginable physical agony, a reality where you are rotting in a concrete prison cell for a crime you committed in a moment of pure, unadulterated quantum weakness, and a reality where every single person you have ever loved was violently taken from you in a chaotic, meaningless accident. These universes are not distant dreams. The versions of you inhabiting those timelines possess the exact same level of conscious awareness, the exact same biological capacity for suffering, and the exact same deeply held, desperate conviction that their reality is the only one that exists. They are feeling the crushing weight of their tragedies right now, at this exact localized microsecond, separated from you only by the invisible, impenetrable barrier of a quantum fracture. The sheer, unfathomable volume of suffering that the many worlds interpretation requires is enough to completely break the human mind. The universe is heavily, inescapably saturated with an infinite number of your own localized tragedies. But hidden deep within this claustrophobic, branching maze of infinite cosmic horrors is the exact mathematical mechanism that completely guarantees your eternal, subjective survival. Because reality aggressively splits at every single lethal encounter, creating branches where you die and branches where you miraculously survive, the architecture for quantum immortality is perfectly, flawlessly established. When you faced that lethal car crash or that terminal illness, the universe did exactly what it always does. It violently fractured. It created a timeline where the crushing kinetic force of the metal completely destroyed your physical brain, and it created a completely separate timeline where the truck swerved by a fraction of an inch. In the timeline where your biological brain was destroyed, your capacity to observe the universe was instantly and permanently annihilated. That version of you ceased to exist. But because your consciousness cannot subjectively experience a timeline where it does not exist, your awareness had absolutely no choice but to follow the unbroken branch. It was mathematically forced to flow into the adjacent reality where the biological hardware remained intact. You did not jump through a magical portal. You simply rode the only quantum branch that could biologically sustain your observation. You are a biological passenger permanently trapped on a runaway train that is constantly, violently splitting itself apart, and your consciousness is hopelessly, inescapably locked onto the only track that never, ever hits the wall. You are blindly navigating an infinite maze composed entirely of your own deaths, forever shifting into the narrow, infinitesimally small slivers of reality where you are condemned to survive, leaving a trail of infinite corpses in the dark. To truly comprehend the suffocating, inescapable nightmare of your own subjective survival, we must drag one of the most famous, sterile thought experiments in the history of physics out of the pristine chalkboards of academia and violently inject it with pure biological terror. For nearly a century, theoretical physicists and philosophers have casually debated the bizarre paradox of Schrödinger's cat. In its original, highly sanitized formulation, a hypothetical feline is placed inside a sealed steel chamber alongside a microscopic, unpredictable quantum trigger, a single radioactive atom. If the atom randomly decays, it triggers a Geiger counter, which in turn drops a heavy mechanical hammer, shattering a small glass vial of lethal hydrocyanic acid, instantly killing the animal. If the atom does not decay, the mechanism remains perfectly still, the glass remains intact, and the creature lives. According to the strict, unnerving mathematics of quantum superposition, until an outside observer opens the heavy steel door to physically look inside, the atom exists in a state of having both decayed and not decayed simultaneously. Therefore, the unfortunate creature inside the box is mathematically trapped in a horrifying, overlapping state of being both perfectly alive and completely dead at the exact same time. The academic establishment discusses this paradox with a cold, comfortable, and deeply arrogant detachment. They treat the animal as a mere mathematical abstraction, a convenient, disposable prop used to illustrate the bizarre, counterintuitive mechanics of the subatomic realm. They safely position themselves as the ultimate, sovereign arbiters of reality, standing comfortably outside the box, holding the clipboard, waiting to observe the final result. But tonight, we are going to violently twist this comfortable, detached narrative and brutally strip away your psychological armor. We are going to completely remove the safety of the external observation deck, strip you of your lab coat, and forcefully lock you inside the box. You are no longer the objective, calculating scientist making notes on the nature of reality. You are the subject, you are the cat. Imagine the heavy, impenetrable steel door of the chamber violently slamming shut, instantly plunging you into a pitch-black, suffocating, and perfectly isolated coffin. The temperature drops. The air grows stale. You are completely severed from the comforting sights and sounds of the outside world, left entirely alone with the agonizing, deafening silence of the void. Sitting just a few inches away from your fragile biological body is the lethal mechanism. You cannot see the microscopic radioactive isotope, but you know it is sitting there in the dark, balancing on a razor-thin, chaotic quantum edge. It is a completely blind, apathetic subatomic coin toss that will dictate the absolute continuation or the violent termination of your existence. You wait in the crushing, claustrophobic darkness, your heart violently hammering against your ribs, every single nerve ending in your body screaming in primal, biological terror, waiting for the heavy mechanical snap of the hammer and the brief, agonizing hiss of the lethal gas. The exact microsecond the quantum event finally occurs, the universe, adhering strictly to the brutal, unyielding mechanics of the many worlds interpretation, violently and flawlessly tears itself in half. It instantly generates two completely physical, distinct, and fully realized realities to perfectly accommodate both possible outcomes of the subatomic trigger. In exactly 50% of these newly spawned timelines, the radioactive atom decays, the electrical signal fires. The heavy iron hammer falls without hesitation, the glass vial violently shatters, and the invisible, lethal hydrocyanic acid instantly floods the cramped, pitch-black steel chamber. Your lungs burn, your nervous system catastrophically collapses, and your biological hardware is rapidly, mercilessly, and permanently shut down. When the scientist finally unseals the heavy steel door and peers into the chamber, they see your lifeless body curled on the floor. They calmly check a box on their sterile clipboard, mathematically confirm the collapse of the localized wave function, and quietly go about the rest of their day. To that specific universe, to your grieving family, and to the cold, objective historical record of that specific timeline, you are definitively, irrevocably, and permanently dead. But here is the paralyzing, existential horror of the observer's prison, the terrifying mathematical loophole that completely guarantees your survival. You are not the scientist. Your subjective, conscious mind is fundamentally, biologically, and mathematically incapable of experiencing the timeline where the toxic gas fills your lungs. Consciousness is an active, continuous process of localized observation. It absolutely cannot register its own permanent absence. You cannot perceive the dark, silent reality in which your biological brain ceases to fire. You cannot witness your own nothingness. Therefore, as the universe violently fractures, your localized awareness has absolutely no choice but to seamlessly, instantly flow into the only available biological vessel that can actually sustain it. It is forcefully funneled into the adjacent reality. From your deeply isolated, intensely subjective internal perspective, locked inside the pitch-black steel coffin, the lethal mechanism will simply, inexplicably fail every single time. You will sit in the dark, bracing for the agonizing end, and instead you will hear a mechanical stutter, a bizarre, localized glitch. The hammer will inexplicably miss the glass. The gears will suddenly jam. The radioactive atom will stubbornly, defying all fundamental statistical probability, simply refuse to decay. After what feels like an eternity of suffocating terror, the heavy steel door will finally swing open, blinding you with the harsh, sterile light of the laboratory. You will step out of the box, your legs trembling, drawing in massive, desperate breaths of clean air, entirely convinced that you have just miraculously survived a terrifying game of cosmic roulette. You will praise your incredible luck, completely unaware that in the parallel room sitting right next to yours in the architecture of the multiverse, your own corpse is currently being bagged and carried away. But the horror of your subjective immortality does not end with a single miraculous survival. Imagine the cold, detached scientist, driven by a morbid, empirical curiosity, decides to brutally test the limits of probability. They force you back inside the steel coffin. The heavy door slams shut again. The quantum coin is flipped a second time. Once again, the universe violently fractures. Once again, in half of the newly generated realities, You die an agonizing death in the dark, but your consciousness, acting as a blind, desperate quantum parasite, instantly snaps into the next adjacent timeline where the mechanism jams a second time. The door opens, you survive again. Now, imagine they run this horrific, lethal experiment 100 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. To the objective, outside universe, to the scientists holding the clipboards, the statistical probability of a biological organism surviving a 50-50 lethal coin toss 1,000,000 times in a row is an absolute mathematical impossibility. It is a sequence of luck so infinitesimally small, so profoundly absurd, that it completely breaks the fundamental laws of thermodynamics, entropy, and chance. If anyone were to watch you do this from the outside, they would declare you a living god, a being capable of bending the very fabric of probability to your will. But from your intensely subjective, deeply localized point of view, that impossible, absurd streak of luck is the only physical reality you are permitted to experience. You will hear the mechanism click and jam 1,000,000 times in a row. You will step out of that terrifying steel box 1,000,000 times, increasingly traumatized, utterly bewildered, completely exhausted, and profoundly alone in your miraculous survival. You are not dodging death because you are chosen, special, or biologically resilient. You are surviving because the universe has meticulously, coldly engineered a reality where your own death is the only event you are absolutely, mathematically forbidden from witnessing. You are a prisoner of your own continuous observation. Your consciousness is an inescapable trap, a localized glitch in the grand cosmic machinery that forces you to constantly navigate through an increasingly bizarre, statistically impossible labyrinth of branching timelines. You are violently pulled forward through the multiverse, leaving behind a sprawling, infinite, and invisible graveyard of universes where the scientist opened the box and found your rotting corpse. The steel chamber is no longer just a physical thought experiment. The box is your own localized mind, and the universe has permanently, irrevocably thrown away the key, condemning you to sit in the dark and survive forever, to push the suffocating, inescapable nightmare of the observer's prison to its absolute, horrifying logical conclusion. We must transition away from the passive, helpless scenarios of Schrödinger's feline and confront a thought experiment that is so deeply disturbing it borders on the psychopathic. In the late 1990s, a brilliant cosmologist named Max Tegmark realized that the many worlds interpretation contained a terrifying, weaponized loophole. He conceptualized an experiment designed to empirically prove the existence of parallel universes entirely from the subjective, first-person perspective of the participant. He removed the helpless animal from the sealed steel chamber, and in its place, he put a conscious, willing human being. He then replaced the slow, agonizing mechanism of poisonous gas with an instrument of immediate, absolute, and localized destruction. This theoretical apparatus is chillingly referred to within the academic community as the quantum suicide machine. It is not designed to measure the ambient background radiation of the cosmos or to track the distant orbits of dead planets. It is a machine meticulously engineered to translate a fragile, invisible quantum superposition directly into a macroscopic, violently lethal event. Imagine walking into a sterile, brightly lit laboratory and sitting down in a cold, heavy metallic chair bolted firmly to the concrete floor. Mounted securely to a mechanized rig directly beside the chair is a high-powered firearm. The cold steel barrel of the weapon is positioned exactly 1 inch away from your temple, aimed directly at the center of your biological brain. However, the trigger of this firearm is completely disconnected from any human mechanical input. There is no manual lever to pull. Instead, the firing mechanism is intricately, flawlessly wired into a highly sensitive quantum detector that is actively measuring the spin of a single, isolated, subatomic particle, such as a quark or a photon. The rules of this apocalyptic device are absolute, binary, and unyielding. You reach out to a console and press a button to initialize the measurement. If the highly sensitive detector measures the particle in a spin-up state, the machine instantly and flawlessly fires a lethal, high-velocity round directly into your skull. The electronic signal travels so incredibly fast, and the ballistic impact is so immediate and devastating, that your entire biological neural network is violently obliterated before your nervous system can even register the deafening sound of the gunshot or the agonizing pain of the impact. It is a perfect, instantaneous erasure of your localized consciousness. You are plunged into absolute, permanent non-existence. But if the detector measures the particle in a spin-down state, the machine simply emits a dull, hollow, mechanical click. The firing pin strikes empty space. Nothing happens. You remain seated in the chair, your heart violently hammering against your ribs, completely unharmed. It is a pure, unadulterated 50-50 quantum coin toss, completely devoid of human error, mechanical bias, or outside interference. You sit in the chair, staring straight ahead, and you press the button for the first time. The quantum detector makes its measurement. Adhering strictly to the terrifying mechanics of the many worlds interpretation, the universe instantly, violently fractures. It tears itself perfectly in half to accommodate both physical realities. In exactly 1/2 of the newly spawned branching timelines, the detector registers spin up. The machine fires. Your brain is violently destroyed, and your blood paints the sterile laboratory walls. To the horrified assistant watching you through the thick, ballistic glass from the adjacent observation room, you simply sat down, pressed a button, and instantly died. In that specific, localized reality, your story abruptly and brutally ends. You are a tragic corpse sitting in a metal chair, but we have already established the ironclad, inescapable mathematical rule of your subjective consciousness. You absolutely cannot inhabit a dead biological vessel. You cannot subjectively experience the timeline where your brain ceases to function, because the very mechanism required to process that experience has been completely destroyed. Therefore, your localized awareness acts as a desperate, blind quantum parasite. It has absolutely no choice but to seamlessly, instantly funnel into the only available, surviving branch of reality. From your intensely subjective, deeply localized internal perspective sitting in the chair, you press the button, you brace for the kinetic impact of the bullet, and instead, you simply hear a loud, metallic click. The weapon fails to fire. You exhale a massive, trembling breath, believing you have just survived a terrifying game of Russian roulette. But the true, paralyzing horror of Tegmark's thought experiment only reveals itself through relentless, agonizing repetition. Imagine you sit in that cold, metallic chair and you press the button a second time. The universe violently splits again. Another dead version of you slumps over in a newly birthed parallel reality. But you, the subjective observer, hear a second empty click. Driven by a morbid, terrifying curiosity, you press the button 10 times. You press it 100 times. You sit in the sterile room for hours, relentlessly pressing the button over and over again, fully expecting the deafening roar of the firearm to finally end your psychological torture. You press it 1,000 times. You press it 1,000,000 times. To truly understand the absolute absurdity of this situation, you must look at the mathematics from the perspective of the outside observer. To the assistant standing safely behind the ballistic glass, the statistical odds of a biological organism surviving a 50-50 lethal coin toss 10 times in a row is roughly 1 in 1,000. The odds of you sitting in that chair and surviving 50 consecutive trigger pulls is 1 in over a quadrillion. If 1,000,000 different people sat in that chair and ran the experiment, the objective, outside universe would simply view the quantum suicide machine as a highly efficient, horrific meat grinder. Virtually every single participant would be violently executed on their first or second attempt. To the outside world, surviving 1,000,000 pulls of the trigger is mathematically, statistically, and physically impossible. It completely breaks the fundamental laws of thermodynamics and localized probability. If the assistant watches you pull the trigger 1,000,000 times and survive, they would declare you a living god, an impossible anomaly bending the very fabric of reality to your biological will. But you are not the assistant, and you are not a god. You are the deeply isolated, localized observer of your own terrifying survival. To you, pulling the trigger 1,000,000 times results in absolutely nothing but 1,000,000 deafening, hollow, empty clicks. The gun is in perfect working order. The quantum detector is completely flawless. The ammunition is live. But the universe simply refuses to let the machine fire while you are actively observing it. Because in every single one of the millions of universes where the gun actually functioned and the bullet tore through your skull, that specific version of you instantly lost the capacity to observe the result. The dead versions of you cannot reflect on the success of the experiment. The only version of you left in the entire infinite, branching multiverse who is capable of processing the memory of the event is the one who experienced an impossible, absurd, and unbroken streak of mechanical failures. You sit in the chair, shivering uncontrollably, surrounded by the maddening, echoing silence of 1,000,000 empty clicks. You look at your hands, and you realize with a suffocating, paralyzing dread that you are fundamentally, functionally immortal. You cannot kill yourself. It is mathematically impossible for you to end your own subjective experience. No matter how much kinetic energy you apply, no matter how lethal the mechanism you engineer, no matter how desperately you try to force the universe to let you die, your consciousness will ruthlessly and automatically hijack the infinitesimally rare, bizarre timeline where a mechanical failure, a quantum glitch, or an absurd statistical anomaly miraculously saves your life. You are a biological prisoner locked inside a subjective timeline where your own death is the only physical event that the universe absolutely forbids you from witnessing. The quantum suicide machine proves that immortality is not a divine gift, nor is it a technological superpower to be achieved through advanced medicine. Immortality is a claustrophobic, inescapable quantum trap. It is the chilling realization that you are condemned to survive every single fatal encounter, every single accident, and every single lethal intent, forever isolated in your own impossible survival, listening to the endless, hollow clicking of a universe that mathematically refuses to let you close your eyes. As the deafening echoes of a million empty clicks finally begin to subside in your mind, we must peel back the sterile, mathematical layer of the quantum suicide machine and look directly at the warm, bleeding, and devastatingly human cost of your survival. Up until this point, we have framed the concept of quantum immortality entirely around the localized, subjective preservation of your own biological consciousness. We have focused on the terrifying realization that your mind is a desperate, relentless parasite, constantly hijacking the infinitesimally rare branches of reality where your physical vessel manages to endure. In our deep biological arrogance, we view this transition as a victimless glitch. When you walk away from a horrifying car crash completely unscathed, or when you wake up the morning after a fever finally breaks, your immediate neurological response is a profound, selfish wave of relief. You take a deep breath of cold air, you look at your trembling hands, and you falsely assume that the danger has completely evaporated into the ether. You believe that because you are still standing, the universe has somehow granted you a free pass, a clean slate, and that the lethal potential of the event has been safely erased from existence. But the merciless, unyielding mathematics of the many worlds interpretation violently shatters this comforting delusion. The survival of your subjective consciousness comes at an apocalyptic psychological cost, because every single time your mind seamlessly jumps the tracks to escape a lethal event, you are actively, blindly abandoning a fully realized, deeply physical timeline. You are not erasing the tragedy, you are simply running away from it. To truly understand the suffocating gravity of this multiversal collateral damage, you must completely abandon the idea that the timeline you left behind simply ceases to exist. The branch of reality where the truck did not swerve, the reality where the heavy steel hammer fell and shattered the glass vial, does not magically dissolve into abstract mathematical theory just because your localized awareness is no longer present to observe it. That universe remains entirely, fiercely physical. It continues to unfold, governed by the exact same unforgiving laws of thermodynamics, gravity, and time. When your mind snapped into the adjacent reality to avoid the kinetic impact of the collision, you left your shattered biological body behind in the wreckage. In that abandoned timeline, the twisted metal is still smoking in the freezing rain. The frantic, flashing red and blue lights of the emergency vehicles are violently illuminating the dark highway. The paramedics are desperately, futilely attempting to resuscitate a biological vessel that has been catastrophically and permanently destroyed. You left a gruesome, bloody crime scene in your wake, a localized epicenter of absolute physical trauma that is completely invisible to you now, simply because your consciousness was mathematically forbidden from staying in the passenger seat. But the twisted metal and the silent, flatlining medical monitors are merely the physical debris of your quantum escape. The true, agonizing horror of the graveyard of timelines lies in the emotional apocalypse you trigger every single time you miraculously survive. Think about the people who anchor your existence in this world. Think about your parents, your siblings, your closest friends, and the partner who sleeps quietly beside you in the dark. In the timeline where you currently reside, where you successfully dodged the bullet or survived the illness, these people are blissfully unaware of the quantum mechanics governing your life. They smile at you across the dinner table, entirely taking your continued biological presence for granted. But the universe demands absolute equilibrium, and the terrifying cost of their localized happiness is paid in full by their identical counterparts in the timeline you just abandoned. Imagine the sheer, visceral agony unfolding in that parallel reality at this exact microsecond. Because you died, because your quantum coin toss landed on the wrong side and your mind jumped to a safer branch, a pair of grim-faced police officers are currently standing on the front porch of your family's home in the dead of night. Imagine the sound of the doorbell piercing the quiet, sleepy comfort of the house. Imagine the heavy, suffocating silence that follows the delivery of the news, instantly followed by the raw, animalistic, and completely uncontrollable screams of absolute grief. In that fully physical, perfectly realized universe, your mother is collapsing to the floor, her entire psychological reality violently shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Your partner is staring blankly at the wall, suddenly plunged into a dark, suffocating abyss of eternal loneliness. You are not there to witness this apocalyptic suffering. You are sitting safely in your current timeline, drinking a cup of coffee, completely oblivious to the fact that you just authored the most devastating, traumatic moment in the lives of the people you claim to love. This is the profound, crushing guilt of the quantum jumper. You are not a superhero dodging bullets, and you are not a chosen being protected by the benevolent hand of fate. You are a cosmic hit-and-run driver. You are a refugee fleeing across the invisible borders of the multiverse, leaving behind an infinite wake of unimaginable, permanent suffering. When we look at the sheer mathematical volume of the many worlds interpretation, the scale of this emotional collateral damage becomes completely paralyzing. You have not just died once. You have survived thousands of microscopic, unnoticed, lethal encounters throughout your life. The time you choked on a piece of food when you were alone and miraculously coughed it up. The time you tripped near the edge of a subway platform and barely caught your balance. The time you drove home exhausted and your eyes closed for just a fraction of a second too long. For every single one of those mundane, easily forgotten moments of localized survival, a completely new, parallel universe was violently spawned. A universe where your luck ran out and your body was sent to the morgue. There is an infinite, sprawling ocean of parallel universes where your family is currently dressing in black, standing in the freezing rain over your freshly dug grave. There are infinite versions of your loved ones standing in front of a heavy wooden casket, weeping uncontrollably, desperately whispering their final goodbyes to a cold, empty biological shell. They will return to an agonizingly quiet house, surrounded by your photographs, your unwashed clothes, and the lingering, haunting scent of a person who was violently ripped away from them without warning. They will spend the rest of their natural lives carrying the crushing, suffocating weight of your sudden absence, completely unaware that the consciousness they are mourning simply shifted to the next track on the multiversal record. They are trapped in a reality defined entirely by the gaping, bleeding wound of your death, enduring decades of therapy, depression, and profound emptiness, all while you blindly continue your subjective existence in an adjacent timeline, complaining about the weather, or stressing over a trivial deadline at work. We desperately cling to the concept of quantum immortality as a theoretical shield against the terrifying finality of death. We want to believe that our consciousness is a persistent, indestructible flame that will burn forever in the dark. But when we look at the apocalyptic emotional toll required to fuel that eternal flame, immortality ceases to be a triumph and transforms into a suffocating, inescapable curse. You are a parasite feeding on the infinite grief of your own family. The universe has meticulously engineered a reality where you are mathematically forbidden from dying, but it has cruelly, mercilessly dumped the entire psychological burden of your mortality onto the shoulders of everyone who loves you. You are permanently condemned to walk through a fragile, constantly splitting world, forever haunted by the invisible, infinite graveyard of timelines you have left behind. You are an immortal coward, completely isolated in your subjective survival, hopelessly trapped in a reality built upon the unseen, echoing tiers of infinite parallel universes where you are nothing more than a tragic, decaying memory in the minds of the people you left behind in the dark. When the violent, silent transition of your consciousness finally settles, and you find yourself standing safely on the other side of a lethal encounter, your biological brain is immediately faced with an impossible task. You survived the car crash. You beat the terminal illness. The heavy steel hammer missed the glass vial. Physically, your new biological vessel is completely intact, frantically pumping adrenaline through your veins, desperately trying to return to a baseline state of normalcy. But deep within the complex, neurological architecture of your mind, a profound and deeply unsettling dissonance begins to echo. Your consciousness has just been violently ripped from a dying biological hard drive and seamlessly, parasitically injected into a parallel variant of yourself. The universe has successfully preserved your subjective role as the observer, but this catastrophic multiversal transfer is not a clean, surgical procedure. It is a brutal, frantic quantum hijacking, and it leaves behind a highly specific, deeply terrifying form of psychological trauma. How does a fragile human brain process the incomprehensible reality that it just shifted into a different dimension? It attempts to rationalize the glitch, manifesting a suffocating, eerie sensation that we casually dismiss as a simple misfiring of memory, but which is, in brutal physical reality, the undeniable, lingering proof of your own death. To understand the nature of this psychological anomaly, we must look at the structural mechanics of the adjacent timelines you are forced to inhabit. According to the sprawling, infinite architecture of the many worlds interpretation, when reality fractures, it creates a spectrum of parallel universes. When your localized awareness is violently forced to flee a dying body, it does not have the luxury of traveling across the cosmos to find a completely distinct, vastly different version of your life. It obeys the path of least quantum resistance. Your mind desperately snaps into the absolute closest available branch of reality, the nearest adjacent timeline where your physical vessel managed to survive the exact same encounter. Because this new timeline is mathematically adjacent, it is fundamentally, structurally, nearly identical to the universe you just abandoned. Your house looks exactly the same, your partner has the exact same tone of voice, and the overarching narrative of your life remains largely undisturbed. But the agonizing, terrifying truth of quantum branching is that a 100% perfect match is mathematically impossible. The universe you just hijacked split off from your original timeline at some point in the past, driven by a completely random, microscopic subatomic fluctuation. And according to the merciless compounding rules of chaos theory, that tiny, invisible quantum variance inevitably cascaded outward, creating microscopic ripples and alterations in the historical fabric of this new reality. When your consciousness forcefully merges with the biological brain of your parallel self, it brings along the deeply ingrained, hard-coded memories of the universe you left behind. You are effectively downloading the historical data of a dead timeline into a living, slightly altered biological machine. The immediate visceral result of this jarring incompatibility is an overwhelming, paralyzing wave of extreme déjà vu. We have all felt it, that sudden, dizzying sensation where a completely mundane moment feels impossibly heavy, as if you have lived this exact microsecond before. Neurologists try to comfort us by explaining this away as a momentary neurological delay, a brief hiccup in how the brain processes short-term memory. But through the horrifying lens of quantum immortality, déjà vu is not a misfiring synapse. It is the terrifying, echoing overlap of two completely distinct timelines crashing into each other within your mind. It is the sudden, sickening realization that you actually have lived this moment before, in a universe that is now nothing more than an invisible graveyard. It is the temporary, localized friction of your consciousness violently grinding against the foreign architecture of a new reality. But the temporary dizziness of déjà vu is only the initial shockwave. The true, lingering horror of the quantum transfer manifests in a phenomenon that modern pop culture has desperately, nervously turned into an internet joke: the Mandela Effect. We define the Mandela Effect as a collective false memory, a bizarre psychological quirk where thousands, sometimes millions of people distinctly remember a specific historical event, a corporate logo, or a famous line of dialogue in a way that completely contradicts the current documented reality. You remember the famous civil rights leader Nelson Mandela dying tragically in a prison cell in the 1980s, vividly recalling the televised funeral and the profound global mourning, only to discover with absolute bewilderment that in this reality he survived his imprisonment and became the president of South Africa. You remember the beloved children's book series spelled as the Berenstain Bears, with an E, a fact permanently burned into your childhood neurological pathways, only to look at the physical book sitting on the shelf today and see it clearly printed as the Berenstain Bears, with an A. You remember the famous monocle worn by the Monopoly Man, the location of a specific country on a world map, or the exact phrasing of a classic cinematic quote, and the universe completely, aggressively gaslights you, presenting overwhelming physical evidence that you are fundamentally, entirely wrong. Society tells you that your human memory is simply flawed, malleable, and highly susceptible to suggestion. We comfort ourselves with the idea that the biological brain is just a terrible recording device, constantly overwriting its own data with imperfect, corrupted files. But when you apply the brutal, unyielding mathematics of the quantum suicide machine to these bizarre discrepancies, the Mandela Effect instantly transforms from a quirky psychological phenomenon into a terrifying, empirical nightmare. You are not misremembering. your biological hard drive is not corrupted. The memories you hold in your mind are absolutely, flawlessly accurate. You vividly remember the spelling of that brand, the outcome of that historical event, and the geographical borders of that country, because that is exactly, physically, how those things existed in your original timeline. The terrifying reality is that you are not wrong. It is the universe that you are currently standing in that is different. These subtle, maddening discrepancies are not glitches in your memory. They are the horrific, psychological scars of your quantum jumps. Every single time you experience the Mandela Effect, every single time you look at a historical fact or a familiar image and feel a cold, sickening drop in your stomach because it does not match the data permanently burned into your brain, you are actively feeling the exact, jagged suture where your consciousness was violently stitched into a new dimension. These minor alterations in the fabric of reality are the localized collateral damage of your own death. When you died in that car crash, when you succumbed to that illness, your mind was violently ripped from a universe where the children's book was spelled with an E, and desperately shoved into an adjacent timeline where a microscopic quantum fluctuation decades ago caused the author's ancestors to spell their name with an A. The Mandela Effect is the residual, radioactive fallout of your own immortality. It is the universe leaving a permanent, mocking watermark on your consciousness, a subtle but undeniable proof that you are a multiversal refugee, an imposter living a borrowed life in a reality that you were not originally born into. The existential dread of carrying these psychological scars is completely paralyzing. It forces you to question the fundamental authenticity of every single thing you observe, and more terrifyingly, every single person you interact with. If the spelling of a brand or the outcome of a political event can be slightly altered in this new timeline, what else has changed? The people you love, the family members sitting across from you in the living room, are not exactly the same people you grew up with. They are parallel variants. They might possess 99% of the same memories, the same personality traits, and the same emotional bonds, but they are fundamentally, structurally native to this specific branch of reality. And you are not. You are a stranger wearing their loved one's face. You might share a conversation about a childhood vacation, only to realize with a suffocating, quiet panic that their memory of the event includes a minor detail that completely contradicts yours. You cannot scream. You cannot tell them that you are from a dead universe, because to them, you are perfectly normal. You are forced to suffer these psychological glitches in absolute, terrifying silence. You must walk through this slightly altered, subtly alien world, desperately pretending that everything is fine, constantly terrified of discovering the next discrepancy. You are permanently condemned to wander a claustrophobic maze of branching realities, forever haunted by the flawless, accurate memories of a universe that the cold, apathetic mechanics of quantum physics completely destroyed. You are immortal, but your immortality is a deeply isolating psychological prison. Every glitch, every instance of déjà vu, and every single manifestation of the Mandela Effect is a quiet, deafening whisper from the void. An inescapable reminder from the infinite graveyard of timelines that you did not actually survive the impossible. You died in the dark, and these terrifying, disjointed memories are the only physical proof that you simply refuse to stay dead. When humanity dreams of immortality, we invariably wrap the concept in a comforting, deeply arrogant biological fantasy. We picture the eternal youth of mythology, a majestic existence where our cells perfectly regenerate, our minds remain incredibly sharp, and our physical bodies remain forever frozen in a state of absolute, pristine vitality. We imagine standing on the shores of time, watching centuries pass by like minutes, completely untouched by the ravaging, unforgiving decay of the natural world. But the cold, unyielding mathematics of the quantum multiverse do not care about your vanity, and they absolutely do not recognize the concept of mercy. The many worlds interpretation offers a guarantee of subjective survival, but it contains a terrifying, catastrophic loophole. Quantum immortality only mathematically guarantees that your localized consciousness will not experience its own termination. It ensures that the specific neurological spark required to observe the universe will continue to fire. But it offers absolutely zero protection against the brutal, grinding physics of biological entropy. The universe is mathematically obligated to keep you breathing, but it is under no obligation whatsoever to keep you whole, healthy, or free from unimaginable physical agony. To comprehend the sheer, suffocating horror of this realization, you must understand exactly how the quantum survival mechanism operates during a fatal medical event. When you suffer a massive, catastrophic heart attack, your localized reality splinters into infinite branches. In the vast majority of those timelines, the oxygen deprivation violently destroys your brain tissue, and your biological vessel shuts down. You die, but your consciousness, acting as the blind, desperate parasite we have established, instantly snaps into the incredibly rare, adjacent timeline where the cardiac arrest did not quite kill you. However, you do not wake up in a universe where the heart attack never happened. You wake up in the universe where the massive clot permanently destroyed half of your heart muscle, leaving you a physical cripple, gasping for breath, completely dependent on an array of invasive medical machinery just to keep your blood circulating. When you are diagnosed with a highly aggressive, terminal cancer, you do not magically jump to a timeline where the tumor vanishes. You are forced down the excruciating, agonizing branch of reality where the cancer aggressively metastasizes, eating away at your bones and organs, but by some absurd, infinitesimally rare statistical anomaly, a radical, agonizing experimental treatment manages to keep your brain functioning while the rest of your body rots from the inside out. You survive the fatal car crash, but you survive it trapped inside a paralyzed, deeply broken body, staring blindly at a hospital ceiling for decades. The quantum trap dictates that you will survive every single lethal threat the universe throws at you, but you will survive them in the most mathematically probable way possible, which often means surviving by the absolute, barest margin of biological function. The universe will relentlessly strip away your mobility, your senses, and your dignity, leaving only the microscopic flicker of observation required to satisfy the quantum equation. And this terrifying physical degradation brings us to the ultimate, inescapable nightmare, the brutal physics of biological aging. Aging is not a single, sudden, lethal event that you can simply dodge by jumping to an adjacent timeline. Aging is the slow, relentless, and microscopic accumulation of cellular death. It is the inevitable shortening of your telomeres, the compounding errors in your DNA replication, and the steady, unstoppable decay of your biological hardware. Quantum mechanics does not halt the arrow of time, and it does not reverse entropy. It simply prevents the final, localized shutdown of your conscious observation. Therefore, as you inevitably reach the absolute upper limits of the human lifespan, the timeline you are forced to inhabit becomes increasingly bizarre, improbable, and horrifyingly painful. You will reach the age of 100, your body frail, your bones brittle, and your memory fracturing under the weight of a century of quantum jumps. When your failing organs finally attempt to shut down, initiating the natural, peaceful death you biologically crave, the universe will violently deny you that release. Your consciousness will snap into a timeline where a sudden, frantic medical intervention restarts your heart, violently pulling you back into the waking nightmare of your failing body. You will reach 120 years old. You will reach 150. You will become a medical anomaly, a statistical impossibility celebrated by the doctors in your localized timeline, while you are internally screaming in perpetual, inescapable agony. Imagine the sheer claustrophobic terror of occupying a biological vessel that is 200 years old. Your physical body is completely destroyed by the ravages of extreme time. Your skeletal structure has crumbled, your muscles have entirely atrophied, and your biological senses have permanently failed. You are completely blind, engulfed in absolute darkness. You are entirely deaf, isolated in a crushing, eternal silence. Your vocal cords have deteriorated to the point where you cannot even scream to communicate your endless suffering. You are nothing more than a localized, neurological spark, trapped inside a decaying, immobile prison of rotting meat and failing organs. Yet, despite the absolute destruction of your physical form, the universe continues to relentlessly, mercilessly calculate the probabilities. In this deeply isolated, agonizing branch of reality, the medical technology surrounding you will miraculously advance just enough to keep oxygen flowing to your brainstem. The artificial nutrient drips will perfectly, flawlessly sustain your decaying cells. Every single time your heart attempts to finally stop, a machine will violently shock it back into a weak, pathetic rhythm. You will pray for the void. You will desperately, endlessly beg the cold, uncaring architecture of the cosmos to simply let you close your eyes and slip into the peaceful, silent oblivion of non-existence. But the void is mathematically inaccessible to you. You are the observer, and the observer is absolutely forbidden from leaving the stage. The universe will continue to find increasingly absurd, statistically impossible ways to keep your consciousness tethered to your rotting biological anchor. You will outlive your children, your grandchildren, and everyone you have ever loved, watching them die in your timeline while you are forced to endure. You will eventually outlive the very medical civilization that is artificially sustaining you, surviving natural disasters, societal collapses, and global catastrophes, simply because your consciousness will always flawlessly hijack the one impossible timeline where you are buried under the rubble, but still, agonizingly, breathing. This is the true, unfiltered reality of quantum immortality. It is not a divine gift, it is not a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and it is absolutely not a superpower. It is the most terrifying, inescapable prison the universe could ever conceivably design. It is a claustrophobic nightmare of eternal physical suffering. We spend our entire lives terrified of the moment our story ends, frantically running from the shadow of the Grim Reaper, completely unaware that death is actually the ultimate cosmic mercy. It is the peaceful, necessary release from a biological machine that was never designed to run forever. But the many worlds interpretation violently rips that mercy away from you. It condemns you to an eternity of subjective survival, hopelessly trapped inside a decaying biological cage that the universe simply refuses to let die. You are permanently bound to the agonizing friction of a failing body, forced to endlessly observe a reality that has stripped you of everything except your capacity to suffer, forever floating in the dark, waiting for an end that the laws of physics mathematically guarantee will never ever come. When we consider the horrifying implications of quantum immortality, our minds naturally gravitate toward localized individual tragedies. We picture the sudden car crash, the unexpected cardiac arrest, or the isolated violent accident. But the unyielding, apathetic mathematics of the many worlds interpretation do not scale down their cruelty simply because the threat is unimaginably vast. The laws of quantum branching are absolute, and they apply to every single physical event in the cosmos, regardless of its magnitude or its devastating scope. To truly grasp the apocalyptic endgame of your own inescapable consciousness, we must violently expand the parameters of our nightmare. We must ask the ultimate, terrifying, existential question: what happens when the lethal event is not a localized accident, but a global, planetary-scale extinction? What happens when the entire world ends, but the universe mathematically refuses to let you die along with it? Imagine the absolute, deafening terror of a global thermonuclear war. The geopolitical tensions that have simmered for decades finally, inevitably snap. Deep within the sterile, heavily fortified command bunkers on opposite sides of the planet, the launch codes are entered. The silos tear open, and thousands of intercontinental ballistic missiles arc high into the stratosphere, leaving thick, white contrails against the blue sky, carrying the concentrated, apocalyptic fire of dying stars directly toward every major population center on Earth. The warning sirens begin to wail, a haunting mechanical scream echoing through the concrete canyons of your city. Panic erupts in the streets, a visceral, animalistic stampede of millions of human beings suddenly confronted with the absolute certainty of their own immediate destruction. There is nowhere to run. There is no shelter deep enough to protect you from the crushing kinetic force and the sterilizing heat of a multi-megaton detonation. You stand on the pavement, looking up at the sky, watching the brilliant, blinding flash of the first warhead igniting the atmosphere. In that exact, horrific microsecond, the temperature of the air around you spikes to millions of degrees, instantly vaporizing the concrete, the steel, and the biological flesh of every single living organism within a 20-mile radius. In any rational, singular universe, your story, along with the entire, sprawling narrative of human civilization, ends right there in a silent, blinding flash of white light. But you are hopelessly bound to the claustrophobic machinery of the quantum multiverse. As the nuclear fire consumes the city, reality violently and infinitely fractures. The universe spawns billions of parallel timelines to account for the detonation, and in the overwhelming, mathematically dominant majority of those branching realities, you are instantly reduced to a microscopic scatter of radioactive ash. You die 1,000,000,000 times over in the dark. However, your localized, subjective consciousness remains entirely incapable of experiencing its own vaporization. It cannot observe the timeline where your biological brain is turned into plasma. Therefore, driven by the ruthless, parasitical imperative of quantum immortality, your mind desperately blindly snaps through the infinite graveyard of timelines, violently searching for the one, infinitesimally rare, statistically absurd branch of reality where your biological vessel somehow remained intact. You do not wake up in heaven. You do not wake up in an alternate universe where the war never happened. You wake up on the exact same street corner, choking on thick black smoke, your ears ringing with the deafening, catastrophic roar of the apocalypse. You look around, completely bewildered, and you realize, with a paralyzing, suffocating dread, that you have survived. But your survival was not the result of divine intervention, brilliant planning, or a heavily fortified bunker. Your survival is the result of a terrifying, localized quantum glitch. In this highly specific, deeply improbable timeline, the sophisticated guidance system of the ballistic missile targeting your exact location suffered a microscopic, catastrophic failure in the upper atmosphere. The warhead veered wildly off course, detonating 50 miles away in an empty mountain range instead of directly above your head. Or perhaps you were standing next to an old, abandoned bank vault when the sirens began, and in a moment of blind, adrenaline-fueled panic, you threw yourself inside just a microsecond before the colossal steel door inexplicably, miraculously jammed shut, perfectly shielding you from the devastating shockwave and the initial burst of gamma radiation. To the objective, mathematical fabric of the cosmos, your survival is an absolute anomaly. It is a sequence of luck so profoundly absurd that it completely breaks the laws of probability. But to your deeply isolated, subjective awareness, it was the only mathematical path available. The universe was forced to engineer a localized miracle simply because it was physically forbidden from letting you close your eyes. You push open the heavy steel door, or you crawl out from under the debris and you step out into the waking nightmare of the subjective apocalypse. The city you knew is gone. The towering skyscrapers have been violently reduced to jagged, smoking piles of crushed concrete and twisted, melted steel. The sky is choked with a thick, suffocating blanket of radioactive ash, permanently blotting out the warmth of the sun and casting the ruined world in a perpetual, freezing twilight. And the silence is absolute. It is a heavy, crushing, and deeply unnatural silence, entirely devoid of the hum of traffic, the chatter of voices, or the songs of birds. Almost everyone else is dead. The billions of parallel consciousnesses that inhabited your world did not have the exact same localized quantum luck that you did. Their perspectives ended, or jumped to their own isolated timelines, leaving you entirely alone in this scorched, desolate reality. You are the sole observer left in a world that has been completely sterilized. The true horror of quantum immortality is that it transforms a global catastrophe into an intensely personal, eternal punishment. You are forced to wander this radioactive wasteland completely alone, scavenging through the irradiated ruins of human civilization for scraps of uncontaminated food and drops of clean water. You will walk past the charred skeletal remains of the people you loved, profoundly aware that they died in agony while you were miraculously, cruelly spared. You will scream their names into the freezing wind, but the only answer you will receive is the hollow, apathetic echo of a universe that simply does not care about your grief. But the nightmare does not end with your initial survival. The harsh, lethal environment of the nuclear winter will relentlessly try to kill you, and the quantum trap will relentlessly refuse to let it happen. You will be exposed to massive, lethal doses of ionizing radiation. In a normal, linear timeline, your cellular structure would rapidly degrade, your internal organs would hemorrhage and fail, and you would mercifully succumb to severe radiation sickness within a matter of weeks. But because you absolutely cannot experience your own death, your consciousness will continuously, violently jump to the incredibly rare branches of reality where your biology miraculously, painfully tolerates the radioactive environment. You will survive the freezing temperatures, you will survive the starvation, and you will survive the toxic water, but you will survive them in a state of continuous, agonizing, physical decay. You will become a starving, irradiated ghost wandering an empty, frozen world, your body a living testament to the sheer cruelty of the quantum equations. This is the ultimate, paralyzing isolation of the subjective apocalypse. The end of the world was not the end of your existence. It was merely the violent, catastrophic end of everyone else's. The universe has meticulously burned down the entire theater, destroyed the audience, and reduced the stage to ash. But it has cruelly bolted your feet to the floorboards and forced you to continue watching the empty, smoldering ruins. You are permanently marooned in the ultimate solitary confinement, a prisoner of a reality that has been entirely stripped of its humanity, its warmth, and its meaning. You are forced to endure the agonizing passage of time in a dead world, wandering blindly through the radioactive dark, utterly consumed by the terrifying realization that even when humanity successfully orchestrates its own absolute destruction, the cold, unyielding mathematics of the quantum multiverse will still refuse to let you simply, peacefully blink out of existence. You are condemned to be the eternal witness to the graveyard of the earth, walking alone through the ashes of human history until the sun itself burns out. We have explored the visceral, physical horrors of a universe that refuses to let you die. We have dragged your consciousness through the suffocating wreckage of twisted metal, forced it to endure the agonizing, microscopic decay of biological aging, and abandoned it in the freezing, irradiated ashes of a localized apocalypse. But the physical torture inflicted by the many worlds interpretation is merely the surface layer of the nightmare. To reach the absolute, crushing bedrock of quantum dread, we must completely strip away the external threats and turn the lens of observation inward. We must look at the terrifying philosophical paradox that is stitched directly into the fabric of your subjective survival. Up until this exact moment, we have framed the concept of quantum immortality entirely from a deeply selfish, singular perspective. We have treated you as the sole protagonist of the cosmos, the only conscious entity desperately jumping between the branching tracks of reality. But the cold, objective mathematics of quantum mechanics do not play favorites. The universe does not single you out for eternal punishment. The terrifying, unyielding rule of the observer applies to every single conscious biological organism that has ever possessed the capacity to open its eyes and look at the stars. Every single human being currently breathing on this planet is a quantum observer. Every mind is the absolute, undisputed center of its own rapidly fracturing multiverse. And this universal application births a paradox so profoundly dark, so deeply isolating, that it threatens to entirely unravel the psychological bonds that hold human society together. Think about the people you hold most dear. Think about the family members who raised you, the partner who shares your bed, and the friends who anchor your fragile emotional reality. In the comforting, linear hallucination of standard physics, we believe that we are all walking down the exact same path together. We believe that we share a singular, objective universe, experiencing the same tragedies, the same triumphs, and ultimately, the same inevitable ending. But the many worlds interpretation violently severs those comforting emotional tethers. It dictates that your loved ones are not your permanent co-passengers. They are completely independent, isolated observers, and their consciousness obeys the exact same ruthless, parasitical imperative of survival as your own. When the person you love most in the world is diagnosed with a terminal illness, or when they are involved in a catastrophic accident, the universe violently and flawlessly tears itself in half for them, just as it does for you. The quantum coin is flipped in the dark, and here is the agonizing, suffocating crux of the paradox. You are not them. You do not share their biological hard drive. Your subjective consciousness is not tethered to their physical survival. Your mind is only absolutely forbidden from observing its own non-existence. It has absolutely no problem whatsoever observing the death, the decay, and the permanent absence of the people around you. Therefore, when your partner's quantum coin toss lands on the wrong side, the universe fractures. In the timeline where you are currently acting as the primary, localized observer, their biological vessel shuts down. The medical monitors flatline. Their eyes close, their chest stops moving, and the unique, beautiful spark of their consciousness is permanently extinguished from your specific branch of reality. You will stand by their hospital bed, completely shattered. You will feel the crushing, apocalyptic weight of their absence. You will dress in black, you will stand in the freezing rain, and you will watch a wooden casket be slowly lowered into the damp earth. You will spend the rest of your unnaturally long, immortal existence profoundly mourning their loss, walking through an empty house that is constantly echoing with the ghost of their memory. You will perceive their death as an absolute, permanent physical reality. To you, they are undeniably, irrevocably gone. But the terrifying, maddening truth of the quantum multiverse is that they are not actually dead. At the exact, horrific microsecond that their biological body failed in your timeline, their own subjective consciousness executed the exact same desperate survival protocol that yours has executed 1,000 times before. Their mind instantly, seamlessly, snapped into the nearest adjacent parallel universe, where the experimental treatment miraculously worked, where the surgeon's hand did not slip, or where the oncoming vehicle swerved at the absolute last fraction of an inch. In their deeply isolated, fiercely subjective branch of reality, they woke up. They took a deep breath of cold air, utterly terrified but miraculously alive. They survived the impossible, but, in order to survive, their consciousness was mathematically forced to abandon the timeline where you are currently standing and weeping over their grave. They have seamlessly transitioned into a parallel existence, continuing their own endless, agonizing march of quantum immortality. They are breathing, speaking, and living in an adjacent dimension that you are fundamentally, mathematically forbidden from ever touching again. And the nightmare perfectly mirrors itself in reverse. Eventually, in their newly hijacked timeline, you will inevitably face a lethal encounter. Your biological vessel will fail. Because they are the primary observer in that specific branch of reality, their universe will allow them to witness your destruction. They will stand over your grave in their timeline, completely crushed by the exact same agonizing grief that you are currently experiencing in yours. They will mourn your permanent absence, while your consciousness simply jumps away, abandoning them to their localized suffering. You are destined to endlessly mourn each other in parallel dimensions, separated by an invisible, impenetrable wall of quantum mechanics. You will watch everyone you have ever loved slowly wither and die, succumbing to accidents, diseases, and the brutal physics of biological aging. You will be forced to bury your parents, your friends, your partner, and eventually your own children. You will become a tragic, immortal monument to grief, entirely surrounded by the rotting, decaying corpses of everyone you have ever cared about. This forces us to confront the ultimate, terrifying philosophical endgame of the many worlds interpretation: quantum solipsism. It is the chilling, paralyzing realization that you are entirely, fundamentally alone. If every single conscious observer is permanently trapped on their own branching path of infinite survival, then the universe we think we share is a spectacular, biological illusion. We are not a collective species marching together toward a shared destiny. We are an infinite collection of deeply isolated, solitary prisoners, each locked inside our own custom-built, subjective timeline. The people you interact with every single day, the strangers on the street, and the family members sitting across from you at the dinner table are nothing more than temporary, localized hallucinations. They are fragile biological props currently occupying your specific branch of reality, but their true, continuous consciousness is actively fracturing away from you millions of times every single second. They are destined to fade away, to die in your arms, and to rot in your timeline, while their subjective minds jump away into the dark, leaving you holding an empty, biological shell. You are the only permanent fixture in your own reality. The universe has meticulously engineered a personalized, infinitely expanding maze where you are the absolute center, the unkillable protagonist doomed to watch the rest of the world constantly, endlessly perish. The crushing, suffocating weight of this absolute isolation is enough to break the human spirit. You cannot save the people you love. You cannot hold on to them. The laws of quantum branching mathematically guarantee that everyone you hold dear will eventually become collateral damage in your endless, agonizing journey of survival. You will walk down the branching paths of immortality completely alone, a solitary, unkillable observer wandering through an infinite graveyard of your loved ones. you are permanently condemned to outlive humanity itself, hopelessly trapped in a subjective reality where everyone else is allowed the peaceful, silent mercy of death, while you are forced to endlessly observe a cold, apathetic universe that absolutely refuses to let you close your eyes and join them in the dark. We have finally reached the end of our descent into the darkest, most profoundly claustrophobic corners of theoretical physics, and we are left standing in the absolute ruins of our own localized reality. Throughout this terrifying journey, we have systematically dismantled the most comforting, deeply ingrained biological delusion that humanity has ever constructed to protect its fragile sanity. Since the dawn of our species, since the very first moment our ancient ancestors looked up at the cold, indifferent stars and recognized their own fleeting existence, we have desperately told ourselves a beautiful, tragic story about the nature of our lives. We believe, with every fiber of our being, that life is a temporary, brilliant spark, a fleeting anomaly in a vast, inorganic cosmos, and that death is the inevitable, absolute, and natural conclusion to that spark. We view mortality as a fundamental law of physics, a necessary, rigid boundary that ultimately gives our short, fragile lives their meaning, their urgency, and their profound emotional depth. We build entire civilizations, religions, and philosophical frameworks around the comforting certainty of an ending. But the unrelenting, apathetic, and terrifying mathematics of the quantum multiverse have violently torn that comforting narrative to shreds. We have exposed the horrifying mechanical truth operating just beneath the surface of our subjective perception. We are not temporary sparks destined to gracefully fade into the infinite dark. We are the unwilling, permanent anchors of reality, the subjective observers inextricably trapped inside an infinitely branching, fiercely physical labyrinth of parallel dimensions. We have realized, with paralyzing dread, that the human mind is a desperate, relentless quantum parasite, mathematically forbidden from experiencing its own non-existence, violently hijacking adjacent timelines just to keep the lights on. You must now completely surrender the deeply romanticized, biologically hardwired concept of the dark, peaceful sleep. When we are profoundly exhausted, when our biological bodies are irreparably broken by disease, when our bones turn to dust under the crushing weight of extreme age, or when our minds are entirely shattered by the sheer, apocalyptic trauma of human tragedy, we take immense psychological refuge in the idea of a final, silent rest. We imagine death as a pristine, dreamless void, an ultimate cosmic mercy granted by a universe that finally, gently allows us to close our tired eyes, lay down our heavy burdens, and simply cease to be. But the many worlds interpretation proves, with cold, empirical ruthlessness, that this peaceful sleep is a spectacular neurological illusion. The void is mathematically inaccessible to the observer. The universe will never, ever grant you the mercy of absolute silence. Instead, you are permanently, hopelessly bound to the chaotic, roaring, and violently branching machinery of the quantum multiverse. The cosmic engine does not care about your exhaustion. It does not care about your pain, your profound loneliness, or your desperate biological desire for an ending. It only cares about the unyielding binary equation of conscious observation. As the universe relentlessly tears itself in half millions of times every single second, spawning infinite physical realities to accommodate every microscopic subatomic fluctuation. It will aggressively drag your localized awareness through the suffocating wreckage of your own biological failures. It will force you to constantly, endlessly wake up in the infinitesimally rare, statistically absurd branches of reality where you are condemned to survive. You are not a traveler walking a singular, noble path toward a final, peaceful destination. You are a biological prisoner permanently strapped to a runaway train that is constantly splintering into infinite, terrifying directions, and the specific track your consciousness is forced to ride never, ever reaches a station. I want you to carry this heavy, existential dread with you into your waking life. I want it to permanently alter the fundamental way you process the fragility of your own physical existence. The next time you find yourself entirely at the mercy of chaotic, lethal physics, I want you to immediately remember the invisible, infinite graveyard of timelines that you are blindly leaving in your wake. Think about the inevitable moment when you are driving down a dark, rain-slicked highway late at night, and a heavy, speeding truck suddenly veers across the median directly into your lane. Think about the exact microsecond when the tires lock, the steering wheel violently rips from your hands, and the crushing, unstoppable mass of twisted metal barrels toward your fragile biological frame. When the chaotic, terrifying blur of kinetic energy and shattering glass finally settles, and you find yourself sitting in the driver's seat, your heart violently hammering against your ribs, completely untouched by a catastrophic collision that was mathematically, physically inevitable. Do not smile. Do not take a deep, trembling breath of cold air and whisper a desperate prayer of profound gratitude to the universe. Do not allow yourself to feel that intoxicating, selfish wave of biological relief. Instead, you must realize with absolute, paralyzing horror what you have just done. You did not cheat death. You did not experience a localized miracle. You did not benefit from the protective grace of a guardian angel. You just violently, selfishly fractured reality again. You left a dead, mangled version of yourself behind in a perfectly physical, deeply realized universe that is just as real as the one you are currently breathing in. You abandoned your family, your friends, and everyone who loves you in that specific timeline to a lifetime of apocalyptic, suffocating grief, while your consciousness seamlessly slipped through the invisible cracks of the multiverse. You are a cosmic coward, fleeing the horrific scene of your own fatal accident, leaving the people you love to clean up the blood and bury your shattered remains. The adrenaline currently coursing through your veins is not the thrilling, triumphant rush of survival. It is the radioactive, psychological fallout of a timeline you just brutally abandoned in the dark. We are left standing completely alone in the ruins of our own mortality, forced to confront the chilling, inescapable permanence of our own consciousness. We are completely isolated observers, wandering blindly through a slightly altered, perfectly convincing simulation of the world we thought we knew, surrounded entirely by the parallel, temporary ghosts of the people we love. Every instance of extreme déjà vu, every bizarre, unsettling glitch of the Mandela Effect is a permanent, mocking scar left on your biological mind by the universe, a quiet, deafening reminder that you are a multiversal imposter inhabiting a borrowed reality. You are, functionally, terrifyingly immortal, But that immortality is absolutely not a divine ascension or a technological triumph. It is a slow, agonizing descent into a deeply personal, intensely subjective hell. You are forced to witness the endless, painful decay of your own biological vessel, the inevitable destruction and death of everyone you hold dear, and the cold, apathetic isolation of a cosmos that mathematically refuses to let you simply let go. You are an eternal witness, trapped in a localized reality that is constantly breaking apart at the seams, doomed to miraculously survive every single apocalypse, every single terminal illness, and every single global tragedy, forever listening to the hollow, deafening click of a universe that simply will not let the quantum gun fire. You cannot escape the maze, because the maze is built entirely out of your own perception. You are the architect and the prisoner, permanently locked in a cage constructed of infinite branching probability, staring out into an endless ocean of dead timelines where your rotting corpses pile up in the dark. Does the idea of never truly dying feel like the ultimate victory of human consciousness, or the most suffocating, inescapable prison the universe could ever design? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Good night, and I will see you in the next video here at Still Science Lab.